She was sitting alone at the edge of a dying station, wrapped in blood and silence, when the rancher stepped off the train. He didn't ask her name. Didn't need to. The way she looked at him, like she'd already seen what came next, was enough. He should have walked away. Instead, he said, "You're coming with me." From that moment on, fate twisted like smoke in the wind, and the West would never be the same. Some stories ride hard. This one cuts deep. The train hissed like a dying animal as it shuddered to a stop, its iron belly groaning against the heat-soaked rails. The platform at Low Valley Station was little more than warped boards and nailheads rusted by time, sitting under the wide and pitiless sky. Dust swirled in lazy spirals. A jackrabbit darted and vanished between the buckled slats beneath the depot. From the final car stepped a man who filled the doorway before he moved. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed half his weathered face, and his boots struck the boards with a weight that made heads turn. Colt McCrae didn't carry a badge, but his presence alone made people step aside like he did. He didn't speak to the station master, just nodded once and scanned the platform. She was there, just as the telegram said she'd be, on the far bench, feet bare and crusted with dirt, arms folded like she didn't plan on moving even if lightning split the sky. Her eyes, black as coal seams and twice as deep, were fixed somewhere just over the horizon, beyond this town, this world. "You the one they sent for?" asked the station master, chewing something too wet for tobacco. Colt gave the man a slow glance. "You sent for me," he said, voice low and blunt as a boot heel. "She ain't said a word in 3 days. Don't eat, don't sleep. Just sits there. Don't even blink much. Town's getting nervous." "Why?" The station master scratched his neck. "'Cause she ain't right. Looks Comanche, but don't speak none. And yesterday, some child dropped a toy horse in front of her. She picked it up, stared at it like it was a ghost, and then set it on fire." Colt turned from him and walked toward her. His shadow reached her first. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him, looked through him, like he wasn't made of anything solid. He saw blood dried at her temple, tangled in her hair, a cut across her lip. Her hands were scratched raw, the kind you get running through mesquite or tearing something apart. "You're coming with me," Colt said. She blinked once, slow. Then she stood. No one said a word. No one dared. Colt led her to the wagon, tethered outside the fence line. The mule gave a grunt, but didn't spook. She climbed in, without looking back. Not at the town, not at the tracks, not even at the station master, who crossed himself like she was death wearing a woman's skin. They rode in silence. Colt didn't expect conversation. The plains were full of ghosts, and this woman rode like one of them. She never touched the jerky he offered, didn't drink from the canteen. The sun lowered behind them, spilling long shadows ahead like a path only the dying could follow. Coyotes sang somewhere past the ridge. The mule clopped along, unbothered. He studied her out of the corner of his eye. She sat perfectly still, hands resting in her lap, eyes tracking the empty world. She didn't look afraid. She looked decided, like whatever road she was on had ended, and the only thing left was to see who came for the body. Near midnight, they made camp by a rock shaped like a buffalo skull. Colt built the fire. She didn't help, didn't ask, just sat a little ways off, legs crossed, staring into the dark like it was telling her something important. Colt laid out a blanket for her. She didn't move. "You sleep?" No answer. He grunted and turned in for the night. Sleep came slow. The fire cracked and whispered. The wind shifted once or twice. But sometime before dawn, he stirred and turned his head, and she wasn't where she'd been. He sat up fast, hand to the revolver at his belt. Then he heard it, the soft hush of movement in the grass. She was walking the circle around the fire, barefoot, slow, fingers trailing along the edge of a burning twig she'd taken from the pit. Her lips were moving, but no sound came. She stopped once and looked up at the stars. Whatever she saw there made her breath catch. Then, without a word, she returned to the blanket and lay down. Colt didn't ask. He didn't sleep much after that either. By morning, they'd passed into McCrae land. His ranch sat across 4 valleys, hemmed in by the Tooth Rock Hills and guarded by a river that liked to flood when spring came angry. The main house was long, squat, made of stone dragged by hand in his father's time. The barn leaned west from the wind, and the corral was always full of something that bucked harder than it ought to. When they pulled in, the hands came to greet them, until they saw who sat beside him. They stiffened. One spat into the dirt. Another made the sign of the cross. "She ain't stayin', is she?" one muttered to the others. "Ain't safe. I heard about a Comanche woman who slit a man's throat just for looking at her." Colt stepped down from the wagon, slow and deliberate. He looked each man in the eye. "This land's mine. She's with me. Still don't make her safe. Didn't say she was. Just said she's staying. That was the end of it. For now." He offered her the bunkhouse. She chose the barn loft instead, climbed the ladder and lay between the rafters, eyes to the ceiling like she was memorizing the patterns of each board. She didn't flinch when the horses kicked or when the thunder rolled that night like distant gunfire. Over the next 2 days, she moved like a shadow, quiet, watchful. Once, Colt saw her stroking a colt's neck through the bars of the corral. The animal, half wild, stood calm under her hand. No one else could get near it. Another day, she helped patch a fence where a bull had rammed through. Didn't ask, didn't speak. Just picked up wire and held it as Colt hammered. Her hands bled from the barbs, but she didn't flinch. Only wrapped them in cloth and kept on. She ate when he wasn't looking. Never at the table. Never indoors. One night, Colt found her outside again, standing still under a moon smeared with cloud. Her head was tilted up, lips moving. This time, he could hear it. A low, melodic whisper. Words he didn't understand, but the rhythm of it felt old, older than the ranch, older than any story his grandfather told. Her voice trembled like the wind in tall grass. He didn't interrupt, just watched from the porch. In the distance, thunder rolled again, closer this time. She stopped speaking and turned to look at him. For a moment, there was something in her eyes, not fear, not sorrow, but warning. Like the land itself had told her a storm was coming, and it wasn't made of wind or rain. Colt looked back, heart steady, but unsettled. He didn't know what storm she saw, but something told him they were both standing at the edge of it. And when it broke, nothing about the ranch, or them, would be the same. Morning came with wind. Not the kind that stirred wheat and invited songbirds, but a sharp, scraping wind that blew grit into teeth and whispered bad omens down the chimney. Colt McCrae stood at the edge of the barn, arms folded, watching her move among the horses like she belonged there. She was mending the stall latch. No tools, just a flat rock and a length of wire she'd fished from a pile by the fence. Her hands were swift, sure, and unbothered by the cuts along her knuckles. A mare snorted beside her, then dipped its head low. She pressed her forehead against the animal's brow. The horse stilled. Colt watched longer than he meant to. There was no ceremony to her, no smile, no softness, but she worked with a kind of reverence. She hadn't spoken since the night of the storm whisper. He hadn't asked her to. At breakfast, the bunkhouse stayed quiet. The ranch hands watched her through the windows, their eggs going cold. After the third day, one broke the silence. "You can't just keep her here, Colt," said Eli, a lean man with dust-colored eyes and a mouth that didn't know when to stay shut. "She ain't yours. She don't speak. She don't sleep. What happens when she snaps? You ever think of that?" Colt sipped his coffee. "She hasn't snapped yet." "Yet." Eli chuckled without humor. "You ever see a Comanche raid?" "I have. South of Canyon Ridge. Found a woman with a necklace made of pinky fingers. Children's. Left a man screaming with no eyelids. That's what they do." Colt stood. The scrape of his chair silenced the room. "She stays. She's dangerous. So am I." Eli's jaw moved like he had more to say, but the look in Colt's eyes broke whatever courage he thought he gathered. He stood, muttered something about finding work in town, and left with his bedroll by noon. The others stayed, for now, but their stares lengthened, and silence became heavier than before. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it watches, waits, and spreads like a sickness. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, and just didn't care. That evening, she followed a limping calf out toward the north fence line, moving low, barefoot, tracking prints Colt hadn't even seen. She brought the calf back an hour later, with a poultice of crushed yarrow tied to its leg. Colt caught her eye as she led it into the barn. "You know plants." She said nothing, just looked at him, eyes unreadable. He nodded once, then turned away. By the end of the week, she'd fixed 2 broken saddles, stitched a torn feed sack, and repainted the cattle brand on the barn wall. Always in silence, always in motion. Like rest was a luxury she'd forgotten how to want. But not everyone saw her usefulness. Late one night, a man named Hatch, new to the ranch, drunk on rye, bitter with regret, slipped into the barn with oil on his breath and a story in his mouth. Colt heard the commotion from the porch. The scream never came, just a loud grunt, the clang of metal, and a thud like a sack of potatoes hitting the ground. Colt found Hatch bleeding from the mouth, unconscious. Her boot print was on his chest. She stood above him, holding a pitchfork, calm as a church bell. Colt looked at her. She didn't speak, didn't move. He stepped over the man, dragged him out by the collar, and left him in the dust with a busted jaw and a broken pride. No one asked where Hatch went. No one missed him. The next morning, the ranch was quieter. She fed the chickens. He fixed the water pump. Nothing was said. That afternoon, he took her riding. It wasn't planned. The air was too still, and the cows too restless. He saddled his mare, then looked toward the barn. She was there before he called her. She didn't ask where they were going, just mounted without help and let her hair blow back like river grass. They rode through dry gullies and up into the hills where the wind could breathe. Below them, the land sprawled, wide, broken, and older than words. He stopped near a dead cottonwood tree. "This used to be Comanche land," he said. She looked at him like she already knew. "My father took it. Said he bought it. But no man ever truly owned it. Just borrowed it until the land decided otherwise." She slid from the saddle and knelt beside the tree. Her hand touched the soil, slow and steady, like listening with her skin. She closed her eyes and whispered something soft, then looked up at him. "They killed my brother here," she said. The words landed heavy and true. It was the first time Colt heard her speak in English. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. The war between settlers and the Comanche left no shortage of ghosts. "I buried him with a slingshot," she said. "He made it from rawhide and cedar. Still had it when the men came. They laughed, called him a little savage. They were drunk." Colt said nothing. She stood, brushed her hands clean, and met his gaze. "I was 9. The wind picked up. The horses shifted. He gave a slow nod. "You want me to take you somewhere else?" She looked back toward the horizon, then shook her head. "This is where I stopped running." They rode back in silence. But it wasn't the same silence they had shared before. Something had changed, small but real. The kind of change that sits under the skin like a splinter waiting to work its way out. That night, a storm gathered on the edge of the plains. A gray smear rising in the distance, thick with dust and static. The kind of storm that spoke of endings. Colt stood on the porch again, watching the sky bruise. She sat near the barn door, carving something into a scrap of pine. The fire inside flickered. Somewhere beyond the hills, a coyote cried once, then fell silent. He looked at her, then at the land around them, and felt it, deep down, something was coming. Not a storm, not a man, but something older and more personal. Trouble had caught their scent. It was only a matter of time. He didn't know what form it would take, but he knew this much. When it came, it wouldn't find her alone. The sun bled low over the western hills, laying long shadows across the pasture when the rider came. Dust trailed behind him like smoke from a dying fire, and the rhythm of his horse's hooves cut sharp through the evening hush. Colt watched from a porch, thumb pressed absently against the scar on his palm, a habit from old days when he needed to feel something real. The rider wore a clean hat, too clean for this land, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Colt didn't need to see the badge to know what he was. The law had a way of smelling like cold iron and polished boots, foreign, sterile, dangerous. The woman stood by the barn, still as carved stone. When she saw the man, she turned slow, her shoulders stiffening, eyes narrowing to slits. She didn't move, didn't run. Just watched him ride in like she'd been waiting for it. The man tipped his hat. "Evenin'. Name's Tom Leland. Deputy out of Fort Breck." Colt said nothing. Leland dismounted, his boots crunching dry earth. He looked around like he owned the view. "Heard you got a guest staying here. Fits the description of someone I'm looking for. Thought I'd pay a neighborly visit." Colt crossed his arms. "Neighborly folk don't bring warrants." Leland smiled again, tighter this time. "She's wanted. Multiple witnesses place a Comanche woman at the site of a settler killing 2 weeks back. Fort Breck family. 6 bodies. Gruesome scene." Behind him, the woman hadn't flinched. But her breathing changed, just enough for Colt to notice. "She doesn't talk," Colt said. "Doesn't leave the ranch. You sure she's the one?" Leland's gaze shifted to her. His smile faltered. "I've got enough to make trouble. And that's usually all it takes." Colt stepped down from the porch, slow, deliberate. The space between them shrank. "She stays," he said. Leland nodded. "I figured you'd say that. You always did like strays, didn't you? Even ones with blood on their hands." He mounted again, eyes glinting under the brim. "This isn't over, Colt. Papal comes soon enough. And if she runs, they'll shoot first." He rode off without another word. Colt watched until the dust faded into the hills. Then turned to the barn. She hadn't moved. He walked to her, but didn't speak. She didn't look at him. Instead, she walked past into the barn shadow and climbed the ladder to the loft where she slept. That night, a different kind of silence fell. Not the easy quiet of worn-out labor or weather-beaten peace, but something brittle, sharp-edged. The men didn't ask questions. They'd seen the badge. They knew enough to fear it. Colt barely slept. When dawn broke, she was already at the fence line, mending a break that hadn't been there yesterday. Her movements were slower, less precise. He approached without a word. "Is it true?" he asked finally. She didn't look at him. "They were taking a girl," she said. 10 years old. Same eyes as me. Same braids. I saw it. They were drunk. Laughing. Said the Comanche owed them flesh for every drop of blood they'd spilled." Her voice was flat, quiet, worn to the bone. But it didn't tremble. She cried. "I stepped out of the brush. Walked right up to their fire." She knotted the wire tight, pulling it until it bit her palms. "I told them to let her go. They didn't. So I ended it." Colt didn't speak. The wind moved the grass around them like water in a slow stream. She ran. "I think she got away." "You could have walked on. Left the girl. Kept moving." "I did for years. Walked past fires and screams and widows making soup for men who killed my mother. Walked past graves no one marked. But I couldn't walk past her." Colt nodded once, slow. That night, she carved something into the barn door. He didn't ask until morning. It was a circle with lines striking through it, ancient, rough. "What's it mean?" he asked. "Truth buried under blood," she said. 3 days passed, each one heavier than the last. Leland didn't return, but that only meant he was preparing something worse. The hands kept their distance. One packed up without warning. No goodbye, no noise. Fear eats a man's sense of loyalty faster than hunger ever could. Colt spent most of his time near the house, rifle close. She stayed by the barn, tending animals that now followed her like dogs. The land held its breath. On the 4th night, thunder cracked again. She stood in the doorway of the barn, backlit by lightning. Her face was unreadable, but her voice came steady. "He'll bring more next time. I know. They'll come for blood. I figured. You could send me away." Colt leaned in the frame of the house, looking out across the fields. Rain hadn't come yet, but the scent of it clung to the wind. "You're not the one who should be run off this land." She watched him. He met her gaze. "You staying?" he asked. She nodded. "All right then." They stood in the dark, side by side, thunder between them. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, there was something shared in the silence. Not fear, not sorrow. Something like resolve. Inside the barn, the horses shuffled uneasy. The land felt like it was waiting. He didn't know when they would come. But the moment Leland had turned his horse and spat dust into their lives, the line had been drawn. And if the law came to collect her, it wouldn't be without a fight. The storm came with no warning, just the scent of metal in the air and the sharp hush that rolled across the grass like a breath drawn and held too long. The sky cracked wide open above McCrae Ranch, not with rain, but with men. 5 riders crested the ridge as the sun began to fall, dark silhouettes against a bruised sky. Leland rode at the center. Wearing his badge like a noose, he tied himself. The others were bounty men, faces hidden behind scarves, guns slung low, eyes already fixed on blood. Colt stood at the edge of the porch, rifle resting against his shoulder. He watched them descend like buzzards, slow and sure, and didn't move. The woman was behind him, crouched near the barn door, her blade in hand. She hadn't asked for permission to fight. He hadn't offered it. What stood between them now wasn't kindness or law or pity. It was choice. They stopped 30 yards from the house. Leland pulled the brim of his hat back and smiled like a man who thought the ending had already been written. "You had your warning," he called out. "I gave you time to think, McCrae. Thought maybe you'd come to your senses." "I did," Colt said. "She stays." Leland's face darkened. He glanced toward the barn, toward her. "You know what she did. I know what she survived." The deputy chuckled. "You think this is about justice? She killed settlers, Colt. 6 of them." Colt raised the rifle slowly. "She saved a child. You don't even know her name." "I know enough." The standoff held like stretched wire. Then Leland snapped his fingers. The first shot came from the left, a crack of thunder, a burst of wood as the porch post shattered beside Colt's head. He dropped, rolled, fired. One of the bounty men toppled backward into the dust, rifle spinning from his hands. The ranch exploded into chaos. She moved like shadow, low, fast, merciless. The second man didn't see her coming. Her blade found the soft meat between his ribs before he could turn. She pulled it free, without a word, blood slick across her forearm. Leland dismounted, shouting orders, his revolver already blazing. Another ranch hand, young Boone, was hit running for cover, his scream trailing off into the dirt. Colt cursed and returned fire, breath steady, sight lined on the man who just shot a boy too green to be in this fight. Another bounty man fell. The last one made it to the barn, kicked open the side door, and stepped inside, looking to catch her off guard. She was already behind him. The sound he made when her knife met his throat was wet and fast. He dropped in a heap by the hay bales. She didn't look at the body. Only Leland remained. He stood in the open now, blood on his sleeve, gun in hand, jaw clenched like a man chewing the last bite of a bad idea. "You're making a mistake, Colt," he called. Colt stepped into view, rifle steady. "You already did." Leland swung the pistol toward the barn. The shot rang out like a bell. Colt pulled the trigger. Leland staggered, dropped his gun, stumbled forward a step, then another, before collapsing face down in the dirt. The storm passed in silence. Smoke drifted over the yard. The horses had broken loose from the corral and scattered into the hills. Blood streaked the porch, the barn door, the gravel walk. Boone lay still near the trough. Colt knelt beside him, pressed a hand to the boy's chest. No breath, no pulse. Just another ghost on this cursed land. She walked to Colt slowly, knife still slick, eyes calm. "You're hurt," she said. He looked down at his side. Blood spread through his shirt, warm and steady. He hadn't felt the bullet until now. Pain flared sharp as he shifted. "Damn." She knelt and tore the hem of her dress, wrapping it tight around the wound. Her hands were gentle. She didn't flinch at the blood. When she finished, she met his eyes. "You knew they'd come," she said. "I did." "You stayed." "I did." She sat beside him on the porch. The wind moved around them, slow and forgiving. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the land glowed for a moment in that strange, golden hush that comes after violence. He turned to her. "What do I call you?" She hesitated. Then, softly, she spoke a name in Comanche. It rolled from her tongue like a prayer or a memory. Then she said it again, in English. He repeated it, slow, careful. She nodded. In the weeks that followed, they buried Boone behind the barn, next to Colt's father. She carved a marker from oak. The other hands didn't return. The ranch went quiet. Just the two of them and the land, wounded, waiting, but still breathing. Word never spread. Or, if it did, no one came. The law didn't bother. The Fort Breck families held their silence. Maybe they didn't want the rest of the story told. Maybe they knew it wouldn't serve them. The girl she'd saved once, years ago, rode in one morning with a bundle of supplies and fire in her eyes. She stayed a while, helped with the fences, told stories. Then she rode off again, but not before hugging the woman tight. No words were shared. None were needed. Others came in time. Not many. A scarred Apache healer. A Mexican widow with a broken wagon. A pair of brothers with no names and matching wounds. They worked the land, ate together, bled together. A new family. Not born, chosen. Colt healed slow. She stayed by his side, hands always busy. Sometimes she sang in her old tongue when the wind was right. Sometimes she whispered stories to the fire. One night, he asked her what the storm had meant. She looked out at the dark horizon. It meant we stopped running. He nodded. Good. She turned to him. You still don't know everything I've done. He leaned back in the chair, wincing slightly. I don't need to. You're still here. She smiled then, just a little. And it was enough. The land around them stayed hard. The sky still cracked. Coyotes still cried at night. But there was something different now. A peace that didn't come from justice or forgiveness, but from standing and not flinching. From choosing to stay. And from knowing, finally, they didn't have to face the storm alone.